Do not wait till tomorrow to forgive. Do not wait till tonight. Do not wait till this afternoon. Do not wait till the next hour. Forgive now while you can still do it.
Our elder Dominique Eshkakagan devoted his final years to working with his people towards healing. He had learned the power of forgiveness in the face of the memories of his own suffering as a small child in the residential school. My name is Vai Samaha from the Lakatman Nation in British Columbia. Between 1880 and 1969, 88 Indian residential schools were built by the Government of Canada and operated by 4 churches: the Roman Catholic, Anglican, United, and Presbyterian. The goals were clear: to resolve what was called the Indian problem, to completely assimilate all First Nations peoples into the dominant culture. All Native children were to be removed from their families, their communities, and taken to residential schools to be educated. Many had no contact with their families for 10 or more years. The government was very thorough. No Native community was left untouched by this policy. Hundreds of thousands of children went through residential schools. We will never know how many. Most records have been lost or destroyed. We lost our language, our culture, and our traditions. We turned to alcohol and to drugs. Over and over again, we act out the violence of our childhood on our own families. We commit suicide because we are lost and can't find our way. Like most of the people you will meet in this program, I attended residential school as a child. This time in my life was traumatic and painful and changed me forever. But this program is not just about pain and blame. It's about healing, people healing, communities healing. You will not meet those who physically and sexually abused us as children. Some of them are in jail. Many have died. We pray that none are still abusing children. Instead, you will meet former students and staff of the Indian residential schools, and we will walk a few steps with them in their journeys of healing.
I was brought up in the country, and we knew, or we saw, some Indians. They used to come down the track, and they used to make lovely baskets, and they'd be around selling their baskets. And
this is in New Brunswick.
This was in New Brunswick,
yes. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
My notion, I grew up pretty well in Toronto. I was born in Quebec. I grew up in Clarkson, next door here, and in Toronto. And, of course, we rarely saw Indians. I think only at the exhibition, when they'd be selling baskets, for example. We went out with the idea of staying 5 years in the schools. We stayed 6.
Of course, I was willing to go. Having just been married, I'd go anywhere at that time.
My son went for a year in our school at Gordon's, where he picked up, I think, some of the better Indian habits in a way, but a little relaxed and generous and all that. But however...
And as Norman says, our son has a lot of habits like the Indians. It's with them, if they have something and you want it, well, they'll give it to you. And if you have something that they want, then they'll expect you to give it to them.
Sioux Lookout in Northern Ontario is a town of 3,400, 40% of whom are Native people. This is a town with rates of alcoholism, suicide, and domestic violence at several times the national average. Sioux Lookout is the site of the former Anglican-run Pelican Lake Indian Residential School. It was built in 1926 and was finally closed in 1969.
That was a very frightening experience. I can't describe it any more horrible terms than it was a very frightening experience for me as a young child. The moment I remember to the point of breakdown was actually saying goodbye to my parents. And that was the hardest part. I remember them leaving and saying goodbye to them and just crying. You know, I have to say that there was some horrible things that went on right here in the grounds here. This is where the residential school, the actual school stood, and in those walls there were some horrible things that went on with children.
I must have been about 5 when I ended up at Pelican Residential School. And from what I understand now, our parents were told that if they didn't let us go, that we would get taken away for good. And that I think it must have thrown a lot of fear into them. And I just can't, I can't even talk about it. How could people have thought that that was the proper thing to do, was to take children away from their parents like that?
It was not a setting where you had a mother, father, brothers, and sisters. You know, you had someone who was your supervisor, and that was his title, he was a supervisor. Not only that, you know, there were others around you that sometimes did not make life so easy. You know, I was scared of some of the supervisors.
I think what I remember most is crying myself to sleep every night, and that what it was loneliness. You want to be at home where it was safe.
It was about 2 years ago that I confronted and I challenged one-to-one the person who sexually abused me in residential school, knowing that I was able to put something that was bottled up inside me all these years and being able to put it on the table and say, here's my challenge. I want to heal. I want to do something about this so I can get on with my life.
In high school, when I was going to school in Kenora, I started hearing the big drum. Like, this is what they call the grandfather drum. And from what I understand now, the men, some of them have passed on now, but they started bringing out those traditional drums again. And that was when I was going to high school, and I felt something in here when I started hearing those big drums. It just did something to me. I'm not quite sure what, but I felt like I had come home.
Today we're seeing a wounded people finally coming out to start dealing with their wounds, and it's a very painful process, but it's a process that has to be done.
And I know this meeting here in town tonight has caused a lot of disturbance. I can just feel it.
This first healing gathering in Sioux Lookout is organized by Garnet and Lorraine to begin a process that some say will take several generations to complete. Bishop Tom Collings agrees to attend the gathering and represent a church that brought great pain to this community.
Pemutagatek, Kakinagagi, Sam Chicagoing, Iwe, residential schools, Kaijagatek.
What you do to the land, you do to the people. And what you do to the people, you do to the land, because we're all the same food. The residential school is a part of that. We're all of the same Creator. I think if I were to make any suggestions, maybe it would be a time for the ecclesiastics, the churches, to put their Bible in a shelf for a couple of months and listen to what the earth has to say. Listen to what the people have to say.
The churches must do more than listen, as they are called in November of 1993 before the Royal Commission in Ottawa.
Welcome to the Royal Commission special consultation with the representatives of the 4 historic mission churches. You are here because your churches operated the residential schools on behalf of the federal government. The purpose of this special consultation for the next 2 days is to offer the churches an opportunity to speak about these past policies, their role in the establishment of the residential schools, and the efforts being taken to alleviate some of the wounds of the past. What in fact was the goal? Was the goal to remake Aboriginal people completely in the eyes of Europeans?
I think the policy of the church as it evolved in the late years of the last century, the early years of this century, was to provide Aboriginal children with an education and a Christian faith so that they would be assimilated into the wider society. And that policy was part of the partnership between church and government.
The thing that's really gotten to me is that we were apparently unconsciously carrying out more or less official government policy that that Indians were to be either assimilated and become poor whites, or that they would automatically die of TB anyway.
They were encouraged to learn, and that they were told that they had 2 feet, one in the white man's world and one in the native world, and they had a head to direct them. And they did well. It was a good school.
And I think that we had every reason and right to be there. We didn't mean to take away their culture, but they certainly we had to help them to adjust to ours.
What did that policy mean in relation to Aboriginal languages? Did it mean that Aboriginal people had to turn their back on their language to the point where they couldn't speak it, or that they should become bilingual and have another language?
George, I'll take a stab at that. I'm Peter Hamill. To me, the language question has different parts. In many places, the Bible and parts of the prayer book were translated into Aboriginal languages and was used to a great extent. But there was also a fair amount of cultural imperialism, colonialism, paternalistic attitudes. They dominated whether there was concern for Aboriginal people or not.
One of the awkward things for staff, of course, and sometimes women complain to me that the youngsters would talk to one another and they wouldn't know what they were saying. It's like Anglophones in Quebec who were able to, the youngsters able to speak French in front of their parents without telling everything. And anyway, that may have been irritating. We never had a policy of the language not being allowed. And I mean, my notion is that they chatted a great deal in their own language. Now, the classes, of course, they were learning English.
The public found fault with us for teaching them English, not allowing them to speak their own language. But these children, there were so many different languages, different areas had a different dialect, you know, and we had Eskimo children, Inuit children from as far away as King William Land. And they didn't get home, you know, every year. A good number of them didn't. They were too far away from home. but you couldn't begin to, you know, well, we didn't try, I guess.
The children were learning a kind of English, but it was their own kind of English, probably based on their own language. So that if they went to town or got drifted to a city, they still wouldn't be prepared to speak standard English.
It wasn't a mistake. The white world was moving in.
Did the church always have a belief that Aboriginal people were human beings in the fullest sense of the word? It was their culture that was inferior, and that what they were instilling was a superior way of life. So once this took hold, that they would be equal to other human beings?
In many communities, Aboriginal people were not considered ever to be as good as Europeans.
The doctor from town had a very good reputation with his white patients, but he definitely gave second-grade attention to our youngsters because they were Indians. The nurse, for instance, they used to get an infection under their fingernails, and we called them crazy nails, crazy fingers. And after a while, the nail would come out, and then a new one would grow. One youngster was taken in to the doctor, and her nail wasn't quite ready to come. Oh, well, I might as well lance it out. No anesthetic, because the youngster wouldn't protest. She wouldn't scream or yell. So he thought she didn't have any feelings.
There was certainly an attempt to look after them medically, and even with their teeth. Now, food, they ate differently. There's no doubt about that the menu would be different for the children.
At Cardstone, they were Indian children. They weren't people. At St. Michael's, they were Indians, but they were people. They were people. They weren't second class. They were as good as we were.
One of the things I never could understand about Christianity was what it meant to be a missionary. I'm a reasonably aggressive person, and I have a big enough ego to think that I know enough things that I could go out and tell other people some things, but I've never, ever been able to understand being a missionary. That, I guess because I'm looking at it from the traditions of the Dene, and for us to go out and to conquer another people and to turn them into Dene, it just doesn't make any sense.
I grew up with a real inferiority complex. As I was growing up, I used to wonder why I was born Japanese in Canada. As you know what happened during the war and afterwards. However, it was through hearing the gospel that I learned that I was worth just as much as anybody else. And therefore, the gospel came to me as good news. And so I have been a missionary. I guess I still am in a sense, not in an imperialistic way, but to share the good news that all of us are brothers and sisters.
How many times do you have to bring that good word around? I mean, like it doesn't, to me, I don't understand how, if it's supposed to be a good message, why it also has aggression with it.
There is a very big distinction between missionary and colonizer, and I think that when I look at my life as a person and see myself as missionary, I was called and see myself as being called through an experience of violence in my own people, and saying, I am called to help my people to recognize the beauty, the goodness, and the dignity that is within them, to tell them that they will show the face of the Creator in a way that no one else can.
Is it possible to ask the Commission how many former principals or former directors of those residential schools or former teachers appeared before the commission?
In the hearings that I headed up, we never actually had an opportunity to hear from somebody that ran a residential school or was a staff person.
One of the impacts of what is happening is that there are many people in these institutional churches who live their life in dedication. They themselves believed that what they were doing was the very best they could do, and they themselves may not have been abusers in any way. They fought the government policies. They did everything they could to change things, and yet they feel like they are being painted with the same brush, and they are asking, what was my life for?
I was hurt too. I thought, well, I put in 6 years of my life, you know, doing the best I could, and we get sort of lumped in with those that didn't.
There were a lot of well-intentioned people. I had some reason to believe I was a good teacher, and so I thought, well, Indian school is an area where I will have a double interest in the people and the work of the church in relation to pastoral care and in teaching.
Most of us were there in good conscience, and we did what we thought was best.
I just count it as a series of mistakes, well-meaning mistakes rather than wrongs. I don't know what we did to the children.
Lytton, British Columbia, 1993. This is the second annual healing gathering of the Lht'k'aht'om Nation.
I think the healing process that we're going through right now is
Chief Byron Spinks welcomes the people to the week-long gathering.
us to follow and to abide by. Our elders have given us a message that we have to begin a way of life that they have led in the past. And it's a challenge for us young people, our children, and it's a challenge for our parents to guide our young people to lead the path, the way of life that our elders and our forefathers have led in the past. And it's a life of respect, honor, and dignity.
There's a history of physical and sexual abuse that happened in this community that came about after some investigation was done by a psychologist, somebody that was working with some of the younger people here, and they started putting the cases together and found out that over 700 people from this community of about 1,600 had been abused in one way or another at St. George's Residential School, which burned down a few years ago.
Entrance is right in front of these two juniper trees of the residential school, and you know, I could still vividly see it right here. I'm glad I'm able to talk about it, because it's slowly coming back more and more as I start healing myself, and going back in time and like, well, that's a lot of information to try to remember.
When I went into St. George's School, I couldn't speak English. All I had was my native tongue because I had been raised by my grandparents. And immediately upon arriving in the school, I was told that I could not speak my language. And I was told in English. And I guess I asked back, "I don't understand you," in native, and I was immediately beaten.
I was constantly abused because I didn't want to forget my language. I didn't want to stop talking Lht'k'aht'om. I wanted to keep talking, and so all of my other relations were there. So I knew at home we spoke Lht'k'aht'om. So I'd speak to them in school, and I'd get slapped across the mouth.
I even got beat in the church once. I had fallen asleep in the church, and I guess I had started talking in my sleep. and I was saying Indian words, and it was in the church. So they immediately, really sacrilegious, like what I had just done was the worst thing. I got kicked by a man named Mr. T. He was a Caucasian male, big man, and he grabbed me by the arm. You remember those old type boots, needle nose, beetle boots they used to call them, the real sharp pointed toes? He kicked me right in the anus with those boots on, and I couldn't walk for 2 weeks. He had ruptured me with his toe of his foot.
In residential school was where we learned how to steal. We had to steal, believe it or not, or starve. When we got soup at night, this is hard to believe, but we got dishwater soup with a few little vegetables in it and a slice of bread.
The food that was served here was very minimal. And then there was a lot of kids that starved, and a lot of us had brought parcels, from our grandparents, or that grandparents would bring them and be stored in a cupboard. And a lot of us would break into that, and just to get some extra food into our tummies. And I can still remember prying open backs of the cupboards just to get into my own little parcel because hungry.
It was a prison. It was a prison, absolute prison. And all things that happen in prisons are bad. Even the state penitentiaries. All the things that happen in those state penitentiaries were just like the things that were happening in the St. George's School. Lights out certain time, sit down and eat at the table. We had to line up in the morning to go eat breakfast. Everybody had to be in rows. Not a sound, not a sound. If someone made a noise, you all stand for another 15 minutes before you get to eat.
It was worse than jail. They completely institutionalized us. Yeah, that was what happened. That is why women in residential schools did not know how to raise children. Because how can you raise children when you're institutionalized? They tell you when to get up in the morning, they give you your mush and piece of bread and a glass of milk, and you're just a number. My number was 418. I'll never forget that number.
When I was 17, I belted that woman and got kicked out of school, and I was so happy, And to this day, I still laugh about it. And if I knew that's all I had to do to get kicked out of residential school, because they threatened my mother and my father, and they even told me that if I didn't go to residential school, my mother and father were going to be put in jail.
When I first left a residential school, I was bitter against English people. I hated them.
They taught you how to hate. Because that's the thing that stuck with me the longest after I left school was the hate. I hated white people.
A lot of them won't even come here because it's too painful yet. I mean, even the elders that are here, find it painful. They don't want to talk about it, and they're holding in that anger, holding in that rage.
The school itself, when it was still standing, I went inside the building. It was a scary place, so scary for me, even as a grown man. It was really scary to go back into that building again.
When I finally hit my bottom and was looking down the barrel of a 30-30 rifle, I didn't want to die. I said, no way, I don't want to die. It's not worth it. Whatever's causing this, whatever the hurt is down there, I'll find it.
I used to be a chronic alcohol and drug abuser, and I was on Skidder Road in Vancouver. And when I started my healing process, I had to do a lot of things through the guidance of the medicine people that I turned to. I didn't turn to no psychiatrist or anything.
All of a sudden I found it. I found what one of the things were in my life that was bugging me. And it was the sexual abuse at the residential school. And boy, I wailed.
Well, the sexual abuse that happened in that school, it's not something I'm talking about. I'm not ready to talk about that.
When I did make the statement to the RCMP, I mean, as soon as I said yes, boom, they're right there, knocking on the door. I'd like to hear your statement, your story. And so I spent quite a few hours with them, talking about it and sharing, and you know, the tears and the whole bit. And sure enough, they caught up to the guy in the city, and he was still abusing children. And it's like, oh, thank you. Thank you. I really thank you, Creator, for giving me that strength to take that next step forward.
I couldn't step forward when all my friends were out there. I guess I was just too afraid. Two of them are dead already. One's total alcoholic, drug abuse. And I know why. I know why. Because of what happened to them and what happened to me.
A lot of people are starting to reach out. They're starting to look for answers. They want to get over what's been bothering them for all their life, eh? And it's hard for them to adjust. When the sexual abuse was discovered and everybody cried out, and some people were happy and a lot of people were sad, when those people came forward and admitted the sexual abuse, they didn't have any mechanism for the healing process. After they divulged all this information and everybody knew that they had been abused in one way or another, there was nothing for them after that, and they were basically left out in the open, and a lot of them felt ashamed, and there were some cases of suicide where the people couldn't take the pain anymore. We asked the people whether they wanted, and they wanted some sort of community healing gathering where we could bring together people from modern medicine, healing, doctors, people with degrees, stuff like that, and then traditional healers. Bring them together and find a common ground where we could start solving these problems, start designing programs and services that are directly affecting all the different age groups in this community. And we could use this as an example to other communities on how we've started the healing process.
In some communities, healing has involved an apology from the churches. In Lytton, Anglican Bishop Jim Cruikshank is given permission to speak to the gathering.
My dear, dear friends, from the bottom of my heart, with all that's in me, on behalf of every Anglican priest and bishop who's ever been in this diocese in the last 125 years, I apologize to you for the violence we have done to you, for the mental and physical, cultural, and sexual abuse. Please accept my apology, and someday, dear friends, I look to the elders to forgive us.
It's very significant to talk about the city, because the people who have come to the city looking for something that they know in their deepest self they once had, which was family, self-esteem, community. And they've lost it, for somehow they have no self-esteem. And so they come looking for it. And so you end up in the city with, in fact, in Vancouver, I remember Archbishop Hambidge used to say it's the biggest reserve in Canada. And I think it is. Probably that's true. There are people from everywhere.
While the problem may have taken place in residential schools somewhere else or away, the consequences are being felt in other parts of Canadian society. I don't think we can overlook the cities and their importance and the Aboriginal population that is swelling in the cities.
I spent some years in the city of Winnipeg, and I know that more than half of the Aboriginal First Nations people of Manitoba live in that city now. And there is almost basically no church presence among my people. In the interim, what's filling the gap are juvenile detention centers, social service agencies, jails and prisons. That's where my relatives are now. In those institutions, that's where they're taking them up. The residential schools closed, yes, but the society had other ways.
Vancouver especially has First Nations from all across Canada. I mean, we always tease those people and say we've got more Ojibways here than or Crees. Yeah.
And with what's happening with our people here in the cities who've been through the residential school system, I think there's a lot of stereotyping going on still in regards to how our people are seen as Skid Row bums.
I really honestly thought that I had survived the residential school unscathed, that I had managed to adapt. I adapted well. And it wasn't till probably in the last 10 to 12 years, I would say, that I started to realize just how much it affected me.
And I've looked back in regards to what I've been through personally in regards to the residential school systems. And I'm sorry to say that there is no justification. There is no sense of rationalization whatsoever that can tell me or another human being that what we went through was good. None.
You were made to feel that being Indian, as they were called, was a shame.
The only way to deal with it has been to run away. And I guess you can do that in many different ways. And I know that a lot of our people have run away to alcohol, drug abuse, and in a sense have moved from residential schools to jails because of institutionalization.
For so long, our people just accepted what was doled out to us. We accepted it, and we didn't think we had a choice. And maybe in some respects we didn't have a choice, but I think spiritually we always had a choice.
18 years ago, I put myself on the mountain to fast. 4 days without food or water in the dead of winter. And while I was up on that mountain, a song came to me, a grieving song. And I sang that song and I cried and I cried and I cried. And I could look down the mountain and I could see my people in the cities, on the reservations. And I could see that they were suffering, that they were hurting. And all the while I was crying, I was saying, Grandfather, one of these days my people are going to get up and we're going to stand proud.
I strongly believe in the spirit of our ancestors. I believe that if we allow them to, that they can still guide us in this lifetime. And I have seen that happen, and I have experienced that many times over. And it sort of brings me to the work that we're doing now. One of the words that we've coined, I think, is living the Creator's agenda, because In our workshops, we don't have a set agenda. We have an outline of what we can do in a day, but we deal with whatever comes up in the circle.
And even in this great big broad city, we have a sweat lodge. We have a sweat lodge behind the house. That's a halfway house for Native men. We're in the heart of the city. But when we come here, we'll light the fire, say around in the afternoon, and we'll set it up to have the ceremony in the evening. And at that time, there's a lot more privacy, and the traffic's not as busy. And the people that have come here have shared that for the first time in their life, they've experienced something in the city that is spiritual.
The exciting part for us now is that the healing is happening. The healing not only of ourselves, but of our communities.
If you survived living through that residential school system, then you've got something to give. If you survived traveling that black road of alcoholism and drug addiction, then you've got something to give. And even if you survived failure in the white man's system, education system, you've got something to give.
Also, the programs that have cost the government in this country millions of dollars for so many years, and that didn't work. Have an opportunity now to start working for our people, because we're finding that the programs that are working for our people are the programs that are provided by our people, and that's what's happening.
I think the main thing that we have to come to understand is that it's very important for my people to be involved right from the beginning to the end in regards to what needs to take place in terms of the true healing of all of our people. And I'm talking generations. I'm even talking future generations of my people.
The federal government of Canada has to bear the supreme responsibility, ultimately, for cultural genocide, for spiritual genocide, for language genocide, and so on. And the church has played a role in that.
So I think the problem nationally is massive, and I don't think we've begun to even skim the surface of it.
The residential school experience was wrong altogether as an experiment for assimilation and Christianization of Indian people. It was an imposition of another way of life, using the power of the state to accomplish it, and the power of the church to achieve it.
And part of that has to do with the elders who very much believe what the church told them, that their ways were wrong and that the church ways were right.
What I see right now in terms of the Indian spirituality is that there is within the Christian movement a resistance to it. And it dates back to the idea that it was evil, and that its reintroduction to the Indian communities is a very slow pace, and in some cases resisted deliberately, not necessarily by priests, but by our own people, who now believe what they were taught to believe, that Indian spirituality is the work of the devil. And my view is that Indian spirituality is the work of God.
You said that it is going to take a very long time, and it's going to be a difficult process, perhaps for many Native people to come into the church, because they had been told for 200 years and perhaps longer that their customs, their religion, their spirituality was wrong. Is the church now ready to say to the Aboriginal people across Canada, We were wrong.
I think that's the force of the apology offered by our primate in the Second National Native Convocation. He did not do it alone. He did it at the request of the National Executive Council of our church. Aboriginal people are represented there, but it's overwhelmingly non-native.
An apology. You and I can apologize for fighting. And we'll fight again. And we'll apologize again. There's no atonement through apology. There's no remedy through apology. It's incomplete in of itself. There has to be other measures taken.
What does the church have to do to open the door? Do you want the door open? To what degree and to how far can you go to accommodate the concerns that you hear?
As the bishop, I've not only said it, but I've done it. Native people all through my diocese have seen me wear buckskin vestments. They've seen me wear a buckskin mitre. They've seen me carrying a talking stick instead of a crozier. They've seen me welcoming the smudging at the beginning of Mass. They've seen me smoke the peace pipe at the sign of peace. I think they're getting the message that it's okay because they see me doing it.
If the churches believe their message is clear to those in pews, I don't believe it is. I really do not believe it is. I really think that something substantial needs to be done there to let people know that they have choice.
For the Christian church, it's a big challenge because it's the measures they have to take involve a re-examination of the basic tenets of their religion. And one of them is that it is the only true religion in the world, that others are wrong. And is the church prepared to do that?
Some of the Native groups that our committee has met with us have said to us, don't try and fix it too quickly because you won't know what you're doing. And you have to be willing to bear the pain for a while.
I don't know how we could ever have done what we did. And so we are living in a time of chaos and broken relationships. And I think we have to realize that and not try and fix it up.
In 1961, I was in Los Angeles, California. I had just come out of jail. I was beaten up. I was an alcoholic. And I went through Echo Park. And for the first time in my life, I saw an Indian standing up on his soapbox talking about genocide. He had braves, beads, he had feathers. And I thought to myself, who wants to be an Indian these days? Because I just left Tennessee. In Tennessee, the restaurant said, no Indians and dogs allowed on these premises. That's what it said. And then Leonard Crow Dog stands up. He can't even talk English. He had to talk through an interpreter. An elder, he says, we are coming back. We are coming back. And the time of our coming back when we will save this earth from the destruction and the greed of corporate companies, we will come back because we will know because the eagle will land on the moon.
If a drunk like me, who fell down on the skids, can get up and walk like a man again, so can you. Don't let anything hold you back from the path that is going to be cleared by the Creator to help you to get what you want to do in life, to fulfill your dreams, to carry out the vision that may come to you sooner or later.
I don't get the nightmares anymore, but up until I was 30, I did. They'd come to me in times when things weren't going too good for me, and I would have dreams of St. George's and the nightmares. But I haven't had those now in 6 years, so that's part of it, I guess. It's slowly healing. And now with my art, I believe that my art has given me the courage that I need to finish this.
I will never ever forget the residential schools. But in order to get ahead, you have to push that aside and get on with your life.
And I'm still going to school. I'm going to be a native Indian teacher, and I'm going to teach my people how to be Indians again.
We will know because the eagle will land on the moon. July 20, 1969, I was watching TV in Minneapolis. Just like this TV screen, across the border there came this little bulletin that says the eagle has landed on the moon. The eagle has landed on the moon. NASA had sent a spaceship into the moon, the little module that landed there. This is only one of the prophecies, there are many. And since that time, I've been privileged to watch the rain fall over indigenous country. I've seen people getting well.
I have seen families, whole families become healed, and that's really beautiful.
But that process of healing is happening. And now what needs to take place, in my view, is that it has to crystallize like a societal movement as opposed to an individual journey. In other words, all our people have to be involved in that process.
I mean, healing's a lifetime thing. And you know, I'm trying to share that with a lot of the non-native people that I'm working with, and saying, you know, don't expect our people to understand you right away. So there's so much garbage, so much hatred, anger, fear, frustration, whatever going on in their lives right now that they won't hear you.
The beginning of healing may begin now, but the true healing of all of our people is going to be 7 generations.
It's good. It's really good. It's healthy. I mean, we're by the water. We're in the air. Sunshine's behind our backs, and that's our teachings. You got to have that sun behind you. That way you know what's in front of you.